Over the last 86 years, the Penn State Department of Meteorology and Atmospheric Science has churned out thousands of degrees. We've got alumni based all over the world. This segment is a new one for Weather World, and it's our chance to catch up with some of those great alumni and some of the cool things they're working on in the field. Today, we're joined by Dr. Dan Vecellio, a 2011 graduate of the department. Dan and I, we were actually the same class in undergrad. And Dan, great to have you on the show today.
Yeah, it's great to be back in Walker Building, Penn State, all that in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Take us through your academic journey, your career path, and what you're working on today.
Yeah, so I graduated here in 2011, like Rob said, with a degree in meteorology. I then got my master's from Texas Tech University, graduating in 2015 in atmospheric science. And then I switched things up a little bit, getting my PhD in geography at Texas A&M University, where I graduated just a few months ago. My dissertation research focused on land-atmosphere interactions in permafrost regions of Eurasia, but now I'm doing something completely different, looking at the impacts of climate change on thermoregulation in the elderly.
Very cool. So what made you want to focus on climate change and its effects on human health?
Yeah, so during my dissertation, I would look at sensible heat fluxes, latent heat fluxes coming out of the ground in far off parts of Eurasia where no one was living, which is important, but it doesn't impact people day to day. And I realized that if I wanted to do research for the next 50 years of my life, I needed to do something that directly impacted people. And as climate change becomes a greater and greater exacerbation on our physical lives and things of that sort, this is something, and these are research topics that will have applicability for the rest of my career.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, your path has taken you back here to Penn State, now working on a postdoc. Take us through specifically what you're researching right now.
Sure. So my postdoc is housed in the Center for Healthy Aging within the College of Health and Human Development here. And I'm actually looking at, like I said, looking at the impacts of climate change on thermoregulation in the elderly. And we're also looking at young subjects, too, to compare how heat and heat stress affects the young and differs through the elderly. So what we're able to do is we have an environmental chamber where we will place subjects in this chamber, volunteers, of course, and they will either ride a bike or walk on a treadmill at very, very low metabolic rates or low work rates to mimic the activities of daily living. And what we'll do there is we will look at their core body temperatures while we either keep the temperature the same and rise vapor pressure to create more real warm, humid environments, or hold vapor pressure constant and rise temperature to make really, really hot, dry environments in there. And we look at how their bodies and how their core temperatures react to that and find a point where their heat stress essentially becomes uncompensable and their core body temperatures rise without being able to be stopped.
Mm-hmm. And I know that water vapor, that wet bulb temperature rather, has been mentioned as a threshold for sporting events. John Neese actually did a Weather-Wise episode about that last year or even earlier this year. But now it seems that that's applicable to more than just sporting events with a changing climate.
For sure, yeah. So there was a paper that came out in 2010 looking at the impact of wet bulb temperatures on heat stress in just general populations and whether humans would be able to adapt to these changing climates. And they set upon a threshold of about 35 degrees Celsius as to where if you had a wet bulb temperature above 35 degrees Celsius, you were no longer able to evaporate enough sweat to be able to cool yourself. Mm-hmm. And based on the results of early results that we've had since I started my postdoc here that we just sent to the Journal of Applied Physiology, we are finding that for young subjects, that threshold is much lower. And when you think about the elderly who have, different other health problems and just general physiological breakdown as you age, those thresholds may be even lower than what we're seeing in the young healthy subjects.
So a lot of these impacts are things that people will experience potentially in our lifetime.
Oh, yeah, we are already experiencing these things. We saw just earlier this summer tons of deaths in the Pacific Northwest during the heat dome event. After Hurricane Ida in New Orleans, where power was out and people were not able to have access to air conditioning or fans or anything like that to cool themselves down. So we are already seeing this, and this is going to, obviously, as you said, become have bigger impacts as we move along.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Well, fascinating research. Let's shift gears a little bit here, and what do you think is next for your career, or where do you think your path is going to take you?
So after this postdoc, I would like to become a professor, stay on the tenure track, and be able to teach and do research, and share my knowledge with others for the rest of my life.
We've got to touch on, what are some of your favorite memories from 10 years ago here in the department?
So I was a member of Campus Weather Service when I was here. So I 10 years ago, I remember being in front of the green screen here and doing my own weather reports. I was also a writer and editor for a online news source here, so that was a lot of fun as well, where I was able to write about sports and also some of my weather interests as well.
Great to have you back here at Penn State for sure, working on some groundbreaking research. What do you like to do when you're not working on that research, when you're outside of work?
Sure. I'm very boring, but when I'm not just spending time with my fiance and my cat at home, it's been nice to be back here to be able to go to football games. My love of Penn State football continued even as I lived in Texas for the last almost decade. We enjoy going to doing outdoor events around here, going to cideries and breweries, going hiking, things of that sort. So anything to keep me active.
There's a lot to see and do here in Central PA. Last question, Dan. Any advice for today's crop of meteorology and atmospheric science students?
I would probably advise current students to be broad. The challenges and the problems that we're going to have to solve over the next 20, 50 years, things of that sort, are not going to be solved by one person or one discipline alone. And that's something I've learned, especially being in a geography department where I got my PhD, is that you need a lot of people to answer some of these questions. So expand your horizons, think about things other than meteorology from time to time, and we'll be able to do a lot of good in the future.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Dan. Dr. Dan Vecellio, 2011 graduate of the Department of Meteorology and Atmospheric Science. Thanks for chatting with us today, Dan.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
We'll be back in just a moment with more.